Okay. And for those of you who aren't too familiar with OBIA, we are with the Ontario Brain Injury Association, and our mission is to enhance the lives of Ontarians living with acquired brain injuries through education, awareness, and support. And specifically, our Return to Work project incorporates a bit of all three of those things: education, awareness, and support. My name is Mackenzie. I am a social worker and I am the mental health coordinator. And this morning I'm also joined with Zoe, and I'll let her introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining. My name is Zoe. I am an occupational therapist, and I'm the project lead for the Obaya Return to Work program.
Great. And we also have a third coworker, Ope. She's not with us this morning, but she is our program and research coordinator. So this morning we have about an hour scheduled together. We don't think it will take that long to get through our material, but we're going to go through a little bit about the research on returning to work after someone has sustained a acquired brain injury. We'll give you a bit of an overview of our project, talking about our three kind of components of the project: eligibility, how to refer someone, and how you as a healthcare provider or professional can get involved in our project. And Zoe will talk a little bit about how to prepare the people you work with for returning to work, and some tips and tricks, things to keep in mind as you're working with your clients or patients. And of course, we'll have a questions and answers period as well. Okay. So what we know about returning to work and the return to work process for those who have sustained an acquired brain injury. People, survivors of concussion brain injury, face lots of different challenges and barriers returning to work after their injury. And when someone's unable to return to work or unemployment, both of those things are linked to pretty serious mental health challenges. So including depression, low self-esteem, and low life satisfaction. And through our focus groups that we held with both employers and survivors of concussion and brain injury, employers really noted that they have a lack of understanding and a lack of knowledge on concussion and brain injury and how to support their employees as they return to work. The research does show some positive indicators for returning to work or sustainably returning to work for a longer period. Those are a strong relationship between the employer and the employee. So of course, that's something that starts from really the interview process or day one on the job. The second is flexibility. That's not really well defined in the literature, but things like flexible work hours, flexible working models, work from home, work remotely, virtually, etc. And the last positive indicator is a good job fit. So after someone has sustained an ABI, their current abilities are a good fit for the job that they're returning to pre-injury. And through our environmental scan, we found lots of online resources or workbooks, text-based items about the return to work process. However, we couldn't come across any collaborative program that aims to support the return to work process for both survivors and their employers. And that's where our project comes in. So our return to work project has three main components. So we have the blue, pink, and purple in the middle. And our overall goal is to improve the return to work process for concussion brain injury survivors and to increase employers' capacity to support survivors. So our blue side of things is our employee services. So we've named this the Return to Work program, and this is where employees can access an online training. Our pink side of things is our employer services, called the Employer Support Initiative. They will have their own training as well, geared towards employers. And they would also have access to something called consultation services that I'll go over in just a minute. And in the middle, we have our purple program, our enhanced support services. And this is a collaborative effort between the employee and their employer to support them for about 6 months as they move through the return to work process. And in enhanced support services, the employee will have access to myself, who I'll provide social work services, and Zoe, who will provide occupational therapy consultation services. And so our employer support initiative, the online training will go over basic information about concussion and brain injury. Employers will learn about the symptoms and related accommodations. It gives a bit of an overview of mental health and stress in the workplace and how employers can really get involved in that. There'll be a section or a module on communication and managing setbacks. And our employers will take a pass-fail quiz to receive a certification. They also might have access to consultation services depending on if they have an employee returning with a concussion brain injury or not. And this would just be a brief consultation with Zoe to provide a bit of guidance on the gradual return to work and perhaps some appropriate accommodations. Our return to work program for employees, their online training is self-paced and it's used, or our hope is that it will be used as a bit of a work hardening opportunity for employees and to really practice some of the strategies that we've presented throughout the training. So they'll also get an overview of concussion brain injury. We'll take a look at physical, cognitive, and emotional symptoms of acquired brain injury and really present them with as many coping strategies as we can so that they have the opportunity to figure out which strategies work best for them. There is a short module on diet, sleep, and movement and how that can support their overall health and, of course, support the return to work process from that. And then there is a large section on returning to work and a assessment for people to figure out if they are ready to return to work based on a few different factors. And through the program, participants will have access to a downloadable workbook, which they will be encouraged to fill out activities, reflection questions, again, really getting them engaged in the material. And our enhanced support services, again, this is the collaboration between employees and employers. So through this part of the program, both parties will get occupational therapy support, so consultation with the employer and the employee to assist with accommodations. Zoe will take a look at the job descriptions and the task breakdowns. She'll help guide people through the return to work process in a gradual manner. And she'll help with this monitoring piece, so problem solving around setbacks. And then myself, I'll provide the social work support. So I'll be providing individual or one-to-one counseling services. And I will also be running facilitated return to work support groups so that peers can engage in collaborative problem solving. And I will pass it over to Zoe to talk about the eligibility criteria.
Okay, so who is eligible for this program? So any employer who is based in Ontario can take our online training program. And then to get access to this enhanced support service, I think the important thing is our program was funded by the federal government, but we were funded to support the employer. So that is our deliverable for this project. So unfortunately, if 50 employees took our training, that doesn't count towards our deliverable. It's the employer taking our training that counts as our deliverable. So we really need to make it an incentive for employers to want to take the training. So if the employer has an employee that is willing, and they're both willing to take our training, they can get access to this enhanced support services. So to be eligible, both parties have to agree to take our training. The employee has to have sustained a concussion or a brain injury that has led to the time off. And this includes both TBI and non-TBI. So we will accept stroke and brain tumors. Of course, we're not accepting things like Parkinson's, MS, Guillain-Barré, ALS, the more neurodegenerative diseases. The employee is returning to their pre-injury role or employer. So we're not providing vocational therapy. So we're not doing job searching. I'm not doing an assessment of strengths and weaknesses and what jobs the individual should be applying for. We're not practicing interview skills. The employee has received medical clearance to return to work by their primary healthcare provider. The employee resides in Ontario, even though it will be done virtually. Again, the funding is only within Ontario. And then again, like I said, the employer and the employee consent to the program. And this is where if you're telling your client about our program, I think the key piece is that they will have to disclose to their employer that they have sustained a concussion or a brain injury. We have a release of information consent form because unfortunately we can't hide that. The training basically only talks about brain injury and concussion. When we reach out to them or from Obaya, it's inevitable that the employer will know. So they will be signing a release of information. If the employer does not consent to the program, the employee can still take our training. So our referral process is very simple. You just go to the Obaya website. It's a self-referral, so both the individual can do it themselves, and under our support, there's a return to work project, and it will take them to our homepage, which they'll be able to fill out an expression of interest form. This is very basic. It just asks for some generic information, the type of injury they've sustained, do they have a start date for return to work, sort of some basic data questions that we're looking to gather because we want to do a little bit of a research component for this project as well to get information. The estimated start date of our online training to begin is May 1st. So when we'll have access and be able to launch the online training. We're slightly delayed, but not too much. So what can you do as frontline staff that's trying to get involved or support this program? So for those of you who complete return to work reports, right? Some of you may, we've spoken to some OTs who put it in the referral or into the report that's going to go to the employer that says this program exists if you want to be involved and get more information. You can also work in tandem with your client to go through the employee program, the online training. Again, it's not for OTs on the listening. It's not raw, it's all the stuff that's in this training. You guys probably cover it all in your sessions with your clients. It's just another way for people to get access to this information, to, work through it in a self-paced way. So they don't have to sit down and do it the whole time. It's self-paced. They can come and go as they please. You can use it as a supplementary to current support. So if you work in the OHIP funded system and your client is being discharged from outpatient, we've spoken to a few OTs who are now putting it on in their discharge report under recommendations. In 6 months, reach out to Obaya to return to work, and you can begin this online training as sort of next steps. Again, I really want to articulate that this is not in replacement of direct one-to-one therapy or treatment, right? This is supplementary. It's another tool that people can use. We all work in brain injury. We know repetition, hearing this stuff at different times, how you hear the information all impacts how the individual sort of progresses along their recovery and their recovery journey. So when we're thinking about preparing someone from return to work, the things I sort of think about is number one, have they been medically cleared to return, right? Having that conversation either with their family physician or their physiatrist or or their whole healthcare team is this person ready to go back to work? I also think about from the individual is, are they able to manage their day-to-day tasks and symptoms, right? Do they have a good grasp of what they're how they go about their day, how much support is in place right now? Do they have the ability to prioritize work? And sort of a key messaging I always tell people when they're going back to work is something may have to give when you go back, right? Work is a lot. I always tell people it's a different beast. It's not, mistakes, unfortunately, have a greater impact. It's more energy draining. You have to be on. Um, so how are you going to prioritize work? How are you going to and manage home, right? Those home tasks don't disappear when you go back to work. Evaluating the risks associated with return to work, right? There's always risks, especially for some of those individuals who may be in the motor vehicle stream and their cases aren't settled, right? There's things, financial things that come on. Same with, financially, maybe they can't afford to be off and they have to go back, right? There's always risks and benefits and just helping them work through that decision. Does the individual have insight and awareness, right? That is a huge one. Do they have awareness of where their strengths are, where their weaknesses are, their limitations? What are possible accommodations that may be available to them? Do they have supports in place? And this is really critical. I think as again, we know people's networks are so important, and how are they going to utilize those networks when they go back to work? Where are they going to get their support where they need it? And then, of course, logistically planning. How are they going to get to work? What are they going to say to the other people, their coworkers or their employer before they go back, right? Do they have a little script written if they don't want to disclose that they've sustained this type of injury? And when we talk about logistical planning, I tell the individual, you need to practice going into work. If you work on Monday at 8 a.m., you need to practice how you're going to get there for Monday at 8 a.m. You can't practice going Sunday at noon. Those are different dynamics, right? So really putting a bit of ownership on the individual as well to start planning for this. And then things to keep in mind. So returning to work is a process. It's not a singular event, right? When we look at this project and we evaluate it, we will look at if the person is still there. We're going to do follow-up. So we'll do a year follow-up as well as see where they're at 6 months. And life happens sometimes. So the success of the project doesn't necessarily mean the individual has remained in this position for a year. Life is unpredictable, work is unpredictable. When you're working with your client, even if work is not an immediate goal, work, if that is one of their goals, I always say connect it to everything they do daily, right? Connecting it back to the goal of returning to work. So if you're working on some of the more basic things, getting more efficient at these things is going to make going back to work easier, right? The better they become at their strategies, those will translate over to work as well. When we ran our focus groups and we spoke to survivors, energy conservation and managing fatigue is extremely important for work. So that awareness of how long you can go before you need a break, how you're going to structure your day, your weekends, all that is very, very important for work. I always say employers do have a duty to accommodate, right? We know that. But employees also have a responsibility to use their strategies. And employees need to know which strategies work for them from a cognitive perspective. So for example, I use if someone has challenges with memory, right? And you write on their report, they need memory aids, so they need access to a calendar and reminders. From the employer's perspective, they'll likely say, well, that exists. We use either Microsoft or Google, whatever your system is. The employer isn't going to teach their employee how to use that system to benefit them from their memory, where their memory challenges are. The employee needs to learn, how do I use this system to maximize it to help me with my area of a challenge? So I think that's sometimes where there's a disconnect with work. So the ownership is on both people to change, right? The employee has to adapt. They have to know what their limits are. They have to know how they're going to, change their strategies to, maximize their ability to complete work tasks. The employer has to change. They may have to change the way they communicate with their employee, how they present information, provide these accommodations. Work collaboratively with your client and their support network to plan ahead. Again, stay up to date on resources with Employment Ontario services, local brain injury associations through OBIA. And workplaces are microcosms, right? So if your client is struggling with something in their daily life, they'll likely struggle with it at work. And an area that I think is really important is this social communication piece and practicing that prior to work. So I think those are some things to keep in mind when you're preparing someone to go to work and for them to sort of take on as much as they can in their day-to-day life prior to going back to work so they can feel confident in going back as well. Any questions?
I don't see any in the chat as of yet, but we'll give a couple minutes for
Yeah,
people if they'd like to write them down, and we can do our best to answer them.
you can always email us as well. I think if you go to our website has both all of us on our contact information. Right here. So we don't have anything at the moment. We are happy to connect with you at a later date as well.
I see a question here. So is this program only for clients who are planning to return to work, or also for people who have already resumed work but are struggling?
Oh, so I know this is a very common question. I will say, yes, we will. Typically, we will take on people who are struggling, but not in this. We're running a group, a smaller group initially. We're running a group of 25, and we're keeping that with the, uh, they haven't started yet. But I think we will, it's sort of a case by case basis. I think it'll depend how far they're in their return. I would definitely, if you have a client like that, I think they can for sure take our online training as well as we can maybe, if the employer wants to take it, they could, but I don't know if they would be involved with enhanced support services. Everyone knows, just like how every brain injury is unique, every job is very unique, every workplace. So some of the more supportive workplace, or not the larger workplaces like hospitals or teachers, there's just so much policies and procedures in place that once the person has started to go back, it's a bit harder for us to get involved from that dynamic. So I think it also kind of depends on the workplace they're returning to. So for this first 6 months, we're not accepting people who've already returned from that lens. But the individual could take our training, the employee could take our training.
Another question here, Zoe. Are clients able to receive our OT and social work consultations if the employer is not involved?
No. And the reason why that is in place is because of our funding agreement. Primarily. Initially, we applied for funding to support both the employer and the employee, but the federal government only gave us funding for the employer. So I'm well aware that if we were to provide social work free OT and social work support for someone to go, our numbers would just be out of control and we wouldn't have a deliverable. We need the employer to, continue to support this project going forward, and our deliverable, unfortunately, is the employer. So if the employer does not agree, the person cannot get access to Mackenzie and myself. I will say there's surprisingly way more than I thought employers want to be involved. It is, I would be surprised if employer, we're not asking a lot from the employer. The training is about an hour and they're going to have access to, myself, which I will be helping them. For some organizations, they'll have someone who writes the return, and I can just be in on providing a bit of consultation on what we think would be best for this individual, or when problems come up, can we get involved? Can I sit in on the meetings when feedback is being provided to provide sort of uh, a non-biased approach? And then, so we're not finding that employers don't want to be involved. We actually have a lot of employers willing to take this training right now who don't even have employees, but they know that this is an area of concern. Either they've had somebody in the past or they know a lot of other organizations have had this situation as well. So surprisingly, employers are very keen on taking this training.
Um, I will just also quickly add, when we did do our literature review, again, one of those positive indicators for a successful, sustainable return to work was that relationship between employers and the employees. So our enhanced support services is really taking a look at that. So it does need to be a collaborative effort between both of them. Two more questions here. Is there an opportunity for sharing of materials with hospitals-based ABI outpatient programs that support return to work?
Yes, for sure. I think probably what hospitals, I think we'll definitely, once we get a better sense of what uh, works the best, we'll definitely be sharing that information. We're trying to gather as much data. If your hospital has done a literature review, you'll know that there's no research on how long the gradual return should be, right? There's not a magic number of 8 weeks or 10 weeks. But we can share any information on how to structure a return to work report. We didn't go in it today, but we do in the employer training talk about sort of the four components, which is the gradual return. So what that gradual return to work will look like, any accommodations you're putting into place, any restrictions, and then the fourth, which I think is probably one of the most important, is the monitoring, which includes, you know, more scheduled constructive feedback that the employer is giving to the employee, but then the more of the indirect, more casual feedback, or not, I shouldn't say feedback, but more casual interactions that happen where you can meet with your employee and just discuss how the return is going. So most return to work reports will have those sort of four key titles. But yes, we're happy to share any information we have about the return to work and how to structure that.
Um, and one last question for now, at least. You might have mentioned this, but for how long would you offer the social work OT support? What if the return is unsuccessful?
So we're saying I will support up to 6 months. I don't have a number of like how many sessions you get with me right now. Again, I'm not providing direct intervention and therapy. So we will do a detailed intake with the person to get a good sense of where they're at, their strengths. But we have a few assessments that we get them to answer. But I'm not going to be meeting with them to provide like, how do I organize myself? What strategies, how am I going to use this MS or Microsoft system to help manage? I'll provide a bit of counseling on that, or a bit of education on that, but I'm not going to be the one doing that full intervention. My role will mostly be around helping with the gradual return, so problem solving around that, inputting recommendations or accommodations for the employer if they have any, and then helping with the managing setbacks and challenges that come up while they're at work. So supporting with the monitoring piece. So that we don't know. I will see if limitations get put on it as this goes on. I think, as we've said before, this does not exist anywhere. So we are sort of figuring it out as we go. So maybe in a year from now, when if we present again, we'll be saying, oh no, we only have 5 sessions. But for now, we don't have a cap on it. And then for
Yeah, and
Mackenzie,
for social work, it's the same sort of thing. So it's for up to 6 months, really recognizing that each person is so unique and their needs are going to be quite unique. The social work supports do focus on the return to work process and coping with stress related to the return to work process. And at the same time, work is so interconnected with all areas of our life. So um, there's an opportunity to explore other areas of an individual's life that perhaps aren't work related. Um, but there will be lots of referrals and resource education to help that person after our 6 months are up.
and then
And
this,
Zoe,
yeah,
yeah, what happens if the return is unsuccessful?
I think, inevitably there will be unsuccessful return to works, right? We all, especially if the job is not a good fit. I think what we're really trying to get out of this project is that the person going back to work, we know with uh, brain injury, like we said before, it's sort of the journey. It's a process. And I think we want them to feel that they had ownership over the decision that they left work or did not continue with the return to work process, or that they had ownership over the fact that, you know what, that job really wasn't a good fit for me. But what I am good at are these things. So how can I maybe pivot to an area that, allows me to focus more on my strengths? And again, when we ran our focus groups, that was sort of something that came through because we had a lot of people some who attempted work and then it didn't go well, but they felt, that their job was, they still valued that experience and that it taught them a lot. And now they're seeking um, I'm going to use the word productivity or activities that were more suited to them. And I just think that we know that that's also a critical piece in going back to work. Whereas if you go back and you don't feel it was supportive, you feel it was a negative experience, that's really going to impact you trying to get a job somewhere else. So the project success is not based on if the person is still at work when we um, follow up a year from now. It's really on, you know, does their mental health improve? Does their quality of life improve? And does the employer feel, oh, you know what, I could manage somebody who has this type of injury with returning to work, right? Not such a negative stigma around this um, type of return.
Yeah, and I'll also just add there, I think in those cases where the return really isn't working or it all parties agree it's not successful, I think then perhaps my role in or Zoe's role turns into just a little bit of systems navigation. Okay, who can we connect them with at this point? Or just making sure they have the information when they're ready to try something new, whatever that is. Um, Zoe, two more questions here. Are individuals receiving long-term disability eligible?
They are, and that's sort of where you evaluate the risk as well, right? This is what we talk about when we evaluate a risk of going back to work, right? Some people find it's too risky to go back if they're on long term because they're getting, funding, and if it's not successful, then they may not be eligible again. So it's again working with this population, all you can do is evaluate the risk, but a person does have the right to make that decision, right? And that's also why we're looking for medical clearance, right? So the doctor is also saying, yeah, you could probably give this a try, right? We have systems in place to sort of help guide that decision.
And another question here. So, what if we, in brackets, the OT,
Mhm.
are assisting with a client's return to work with direct private services, including return to work letters with detailed accommodations for the employer? How would our collaboration with you, Zoe, work so that there aren't conflicting messages? That's something
Yes.
we've talked about quite a bit. Yeah.
I'm a big proponent of there can be too many cooks in the kitchen. And I think when we've been speaking with the private sector, a thing that often comes up is when it comes to educating the employer. So, say, for example, you as the private OT, the employer, wants to call and discuss the letter or discuss what's going on. And then say they want more detailed education or they want more involvement from you to help support this. Who's paying for that, right? Is the employer paying you? Because my understanding is that the employee may not want their money, or they're either whether you're being paid for motor vehicle insurance or if they're paying you privately to pay you to educate the employer, right? They want that money to be used for their direct therapy. So I see my role as once the OT has written the return, you have written a detailed return to work report and it goes to the employer, right? And the person starts their return. If you're no longer providing private therapy, right? If you've now, what I would likely take over would be the monitoring phase, right? So the employee has started, they're slowly going back to work. I can be the one that then monitors the return, right? Whether that be sitting in on the meetings or we have tried to iron out if the OT, I would be supporting the employer more if they have questions about things or that sort of thing. I think it sort of depends on. I've had a few OTs come to me who work privately and they said the employer's asked to be educated, but the employer's not going to pay them. And that's sort of where the insurance sort of gets a bit gray is how involved is the private OT once you've submitted to the referral to the employer? How involved are you for that whole process? Are you there until their gradual return ends? Or are you there just for the first few weeks and then Obaya could come in after that? So sort of once the private OT has sort of stepped away, uh, Obaya could continue to monitor and support as needed. Is sort of how I view it. Um, and they would have access to Mackenzie as well.
I think
If
one
that,
nice thing
yeah.
about developing a new pilot program is that there is quite a bit of flexibility with it. So, depending on the role of the private OT and where the funding's coming from and how many dollars are available to the person you're working with, there's really a lot of opportunity to collaborate depending on what the client wants, what the employer wants, and really kind of all the other factors out there.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm not seeing any more questions. Give another
Yeah.
moment or two. Again, our contact information is here. We're always happy to connect at any point in time about questions or about potential referrals or appropriateness for the program. Okay. Well, thank you everybody for joining us this early Thursday morning. We appreciate it, and we hope to hear from folks in the future.
Thanks, guys.
Okay. Take care, everyone.
Enjoy your day.